I never thought I would be lying in a hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if my own parents would show up. But there I was, clutching my phone, my hands trembling as I dialed their number for the third time. The nurse had just told me I needed emergency surgery, immediately. My twins, just 2 years old, were at home with a babysitter who could not stay past midnight. My husband, Mark, was thousands of miles away, deployed overseas. I had no one else to call, no one except them. When my mother finally answered, her voice was sharp, impatient. "What is it now, Emily?" "We are about to leave for the concert." I swallowed the lump in my throat, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom, I need you. I have to go into surgery. The twins." She cut me off before I could finish. "Emily, we have Elton John tickets. We have been planning this for months. You will figure it out." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my vision blurring with tears. My own parents, my own flesh and blood. They were choosing a concert over their daughter and grandchildren, over me. As the nurses wheeled me into the operating room, I made a silent promise to myself. I would never forget this moment, and I would never let them hurt me or my children again. 2 weeks later, they showed up at my door, screaming. But by then, it was too late. I had already won. Growing up, I always believed my parents were the kind of people who had it all together. They were successful, respected, and lived in a world that seemed perfect from the outside. My father was a high-profile lawyer, known for his sharp mind and even sharper tongue. My mother was a socialite, always dressed to impress, hosting charity galas and attending art exhibitions. Our home was a sprawling mansion in the suburbs, filled with expensive art and designer furniture. To anyone looking in, we were the picture-perfect family. But behind closed doors, things were not as they seemed. My parents were not just wealthy, they were controlling. Every decision I made had to meet their approval. What I wore, who I befriended, even what I studied in school, it all had to align with their vision of who I should be. When I was younger, I did not question it much. I thought that was what love looked like. But as I grew older, I started to see the cracks in their perfect facade. When I met Mark during my sophomore year of college, everything changed. He was not like anyone I had ever known. He was kind, grounded, and had a quiet strength that drew me to him. Mark was an Army ROTC student, dedicated to serving his country, and he had a way of making me feel seen and valued in a way my parents never did. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. But my parents did not approve. "He is not good enough for you," my father said the first time I brought Mark home for dinner. "You deserve someone who can provide for you the way we have. Someone from our world." My mother nodded in agreement. Her lips pursed in disapproval. "Emily, you are making a mistake. He does not have the connections or the means to give you the life you are accustomed to." Their words stung, but I did not let them sway me. Mark was my rock, my safe haven. When we got engaged a year later, my parents refused to pay for the wedding. "If you are going to make this mistake, you will do it on your own," my father said coldly. So we did. We had a small, intimate ceremony with just a few close friends. It was not the lavish affair my parents would have wanted, but it was perfect to me. It was ours. When I found out I was pregnant with twins, I thought maybe, just maybe, my parents would soften. I thought they would be excited to be grandparents, that they would want to be a part of their grandchildren's lives. And for a little while, it seemed like they were. They bought us a crib, a stroller, and even offered to help with childcare. But their help always came with strings attached. "Emily, you need to dress the twins better," my mother would say, wrinkling her nose at their onesies. "They are your children, not ragamuffins." "Emily, you should not be working so much," my father would chide. "You have a husband who should be providing for you. What is the point of him being in the military if he cannot even take care of his own family?" Their comments were constant, cutting, and always delivered with a smile that did not reach their eyes. But I tried to brush it off. I told myself they meant well, that they were just looking out for me. Deep down, though, I knew the truth. They did not approve of my life, my choices, or my family. And they never would. When Mark was deployed overseas, I felt the weight of their disapproval even more. "You should have married someone who could stay home and take care of you," my mother said one afternoon as she watched me struggle to calm a crying twin. "This is not the life we wanted for you." I bit my tongue, refusing to let her see how much her words hurt. But inside, I was seething. How could they not see how hard I was trying? How could they not see how much I loved my children, my husband, my life, even if it was not the life they had planned for me? The signs of their betrayal were there all along, if I had been willing to see them. The way they always put their needs above mine. The way they dismissed my struggles as if they were nothing. The way they made me feel like I was never enough. But I was too blinded by my desire for their approval to see the truth. Until that night in the hospital. Until they chose Elton John over me. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I realized I could not keep living for their approval. I had to live for myself, for my children, for the family I had built with Mark. And if that meant cutting them out of my life, then so be it. But I did not do it impulsively. I did not do it out of anger. I did it quietly, methodically, and with a precision that would have made my father proud. Because if there was one thing my parents had taught me, it was how to plan for the long game. And this time, I was playing to win. The days following my emergency surgery were a blur. I was physically exhausted, emotionally drained, and still reeling from my parents' betrayal. But as I lay in bed, recovering, something gnawed at me. It was not just the hurt of being abandoned in my time of need. It was a feeling that there was more to their actions than just selfishness. Something deeper, something darker, and I was determined to find out what it was. The first clue came unexpectedly. My mother had left her iPad at my house during one of her rare visits to see the twins. She had always been careless with her devices, often leaving them unlocked and unattended. I had never thought much of it before, but now, with my suspicions growing, I decided to take a closer look. As I scrolled through her emails, my heart began to race. There were messages from my father, sent late at night, discussing financial transactions I had never heard of. Words like trust fund, inheritance, and legal transfer jumped out at me. My hands trembled as I opened one of the attachments, a document detailing a large sum of money that had been moved from a joint account into a private one, an account I had no knowledge of. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. My parents had always been secretive about their finances, but this was different. This was deliberate, and it involved money that, by all rights, should have been mine. I spent the next few days digging deeper. I called family lawyers, financial advisors, and even reached out to a private investigator. What I uncovered was staggering. My parents had been systematically siphoning money from a trust fund that had been set up for me by my grandparents. The fund was meant to provide for my future, for my children's education, for emergencies like the one I had just faced. But my parents had been draining it for years, using the money to fund their lavish lifestyle, their vacations, their cars, their concerts. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. This was not just about neglect or selfishness. This was about greed. They had stolen from me, from my children, and they had done it without a second thought. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to confront them and demand answers. But I did not. Instead, I took a deep breath and forced myself to think. I had always been good at planning, at strategizing. My father had taught me that much. And now, I was going to use those skills against him. I started by gathering evidence. I printed out emails, bank statements, and legal documents. I made copies of everything and stored them in a secure location. Then, I reached out to a lawyer, a good one, someone who specialized in family law and financial disputes. I told her everything, and together, we began to formulate a plan. This is not just about the money, the lawyer said during our first meeting. This is about control. Your parents have been manipulating you for years, and this is just another way for them to maintain that control. If you want to break free, you need to hit them where it hurts. I knew she was right. My parents' wealth was their power, their identity. If I could take that away, I could take away their ability to hurt me and my family ever again. But I did not stop there. I also began to look into their personal lives. If they were willing to steal from their own daughter, what else were they capable of? What other secrets were they hiding? What I found shocked me even more. My father, the respected lawyer, had been involved in several shady deals over the years. There were rumors of bribes, of clients who had mysteriously dropped cases, of money that had disappeared without a trace. My mother, the socialite, had her own share of scandals, affairs with younger men, gambling debts, and even a DUI that had been swept under the rug. I felt a mix of emotions as I uncovered these truths. Anger, yes, but also sadness. These were the people who were supposed to love me, to protect me. And yet, they were not who I thought they were. They were not the perfect parents I had idolized as a child. They were flawed, selfish, and deeply broken. But I did not let my emotions cloud my judgment. Instead, I used what I had learned to strengthen my resolve. I was not just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for my children, for the life I had built with Mark, for the future I deserved. I began to quietly cut off their access to me and my family. I stopped answering their calls, ignored their texts, and made excuses whenever they tried to visit. I also froze their financial support. The monthly allowance they had been giving me, a pittance compared to what they had stolen, was no longer necessary. I had my own savings, my own resources, and I was determined to make it on my own. 2 weeks later, they showed up at my door, screaming, "How dare you cut us off?" my father bellowed, his face red with rage. "After everything we have done for you!" "You are ungrateful," my mother spat, her eyes blazing. "You would be nothing without us." I stood my ground, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. "I know what you did," I said, holding up the folder of evidence I had gathered. "I know about the trust fund. I know about the money you stole, and I know about all the other secrets you have been hiding." Their faces paled, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in their eyes. "If you ever want to see your grandchildren again," I continued, my voice cold and firm, "you will sign over the remaining funds in the trust. You will admit what you have done, and you will stay out of my life." They tried to argue, to threaten, to manipulate, but I was done playing their games. I had the upper hand now, and I was not going to let it go. As they left that day, defeated and humiliated, I felt a sense of triumph I had never known before. I had faced my greatest fear, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and I had come out stronger on the other side. But I knew this was not the end. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where I was in control, where I was no longer the victim, but the victor. After my parents left my house that day, defeated and seething, I knew I could not stop there. Their betrayal ran deeper than I had ever imagined, and I was determined to make sure they faced the consequences of their actions. But I also knew I had to be smart about it. I could not let my emotions dictate my next move. This was not just about revenge. It was about justice. For me, for my children, and for the life they had tried to steal from me. The first step was to secure my financial future. I had already frozen their access to my accounts, but I needed to ensure they could not retaliate in any way. I met with my lawyer, Sarah, to discuss my options. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She had seen it all in her years of practice, and she did not mince words. "Emily," she said, leaning forward across her desk, "your parents have been manipulating you for years. They have used money as a tool to control you, and now they are trying to use it to punish you. If you want to break free, you need to take control of the narrative." I nodded, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "What do you suggest?" Sarah smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. We hit them where it hurts. Their reputation, over the next few weeks, Sarah and I worked tirelessly to build a case against my parents. We gathered every piece of evidence we could find: bank statements, emails, legal documents, even recordings of their threats and manipulations. We also reached out to people who had been hurt by my father's shady business dealings and my mother's reckless behavior. Slowly but surely, we began to piece together a picture of who my parents really were. Not the perfect, upstanding citizens they pretended to be, but selfish, greedy, and deeply flawed individuals. But I did not stop there. I also began to take control of my own finances. I opened new bank accounts, transferred my savings, and made sure my children's futures were secure. I even started a college fund for the twins, something my parents had always promised to do, but never followed through on. It felt good to take control, to know that I was building a life for my family that was not dependent on anyone else. Meanwhile, I kept my distance from my parents. I ignored their calls, blocked their emails, and made sure they had no way to contact me. But I knew they were not going to give up without a fight. They were too proud, too used to getting their way. And sure enough, 2 weeks after our confrontation, they showed up at my door again. This time, they were not screaming. They were calm, almost too calm, and that made me even more suspicious. "Emily," my father said, his voice smooth and controlled, "we need to talk." I crossed my arms over my chest, refusing to let them inside. There is nothing left to say. "You do not understand," my mother interjected, her tone pleading. "We made a mistake. We were wrong. We want to make it right." I almost laughed. After everything they had done, after all the lies and manipulation, they thought a simple apology would fix things? They were even more delusional than I had thought. But I did not say that. Instead, I kept my expression neutral, my voice steady. "How do you plan to make it right?" My father hesitated, glancing at my mother before speaking. "We will give you the money from the trust fund, all of it, and we will stay out of your life, just like you asked." I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "And what do you want in return?" My mother stepped forward, her eyes wide and earnest. "We want you to drop the case. We do not want this to go public. It would ruin us." I felt a surge of anger, but I forced it down. They were not sorry for what they had done. They were only sorry they had been caught. And they were willing to do anything to protect their precious reputation. But I was not going to let them off that easily. "I will think about it," I said, my voice cold. "But do not contact me again until I have made my decision." They left, looking relieved. But I knew this was far from over. They thought they could buy my silence, but they had underestimated me. I was not going to let them sweep this under the rug. Not this time. Over the next few days, I worked closely with Sarah to finalize our plan. We filed a lawsuit against my parents, accusing them of financial fraud and emotional manipulation. We also reached out to the media, sharing our story with a trusted journalist who had a reputation for exposing the truth. It was a risky move, but I knew it was the only way to ensure my parents could not silence me. The day the story broke, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, fear, and a strange sense of satisfaction. The headline was bold and unapologetic: "Prominent lawyer and socialite accused of stealing from their own daughter." The article detailed everything: the stolen trust fund, the manipulation, the threats. It even included quotes from some of the people my parents had hurt over the years. The fallout was immediate. My father's law firm dropped him as a partner, and my mother was asked to step down from several charity boards. Their friends, their colleagues, even their neighbors turned their backs on them. For the first time in their lives, they were the ones being judged, the ones being ostracized. But I did not stop there. I also made sure to protect myself and my family. I changed the locks on my house, installed a security system, and even hired a private investigator to keep an eye on my parents. I was not going to take any chances. As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel a sense of peace I had not known in years. I was no longer the victim, the pawn in my parents' game. I was in control, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. But I knew this was not the end. My parents were not the kind of people to go down without a fight, and I was ready for whatever came next. The media storm that followed the exposé was unlike anything I had ever seen. My parents, once untouchable in their world of wealth and privilege, were now the subject of public scrutiny. Every news outlet picked up the story, and social media was ablaze with outrage. People I did not even know were reaching out to me, sharing their own stories of betrayal and offering their support. It was overwhelming, but also empowering. For the first time, I felt like I was not alone. But as the days passed, I began to notice a shift. My parents, desperate to salvage what was left of their reputation, started fighting back. They hired a high-powered PR team to spin the narrative in their favor. They gave interviews, painting themselves as misunderstood parents who had made mistakes but were now seeking reconciliation. They even tried to turn the tables on me, accusing me of being ungrateful and manipulative. "Emily has always been difficult," my mother said in one particularly damning interview. "We have done everything for her, and this is how she repays us? By dragging our name through the mud?" I felt a surge of anger as I watched the interview, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was exactly what they wanted, to provoke me, to make me react emotionally. But I was not going to give them the satisfaction. I had come too far to let them derail me now. Instead, I doubled down on my strategy. I worked closely with Sarah to ensure our legal case was airtight. We filed additional charges, including defamation and emotional distress, and we made sure every piece of evidence was meticulously documented. I also continued to share my story, but this time, I focused on the facts. I did not attack my parents or stoop to their level. I simply told the truth, and I let the public draw their own conclusions. The turning point came when one of my father's former clients came forward. He was a middle-aged man who had lost his life savings because of my father's shady business practices. His story was heartbreaking, but it was also damning. It confirmed everything I had been saying about my parents, and it gave our case the credibility it needed. "Your father ruined my life," the man said during a press conference. "He took everything from me, and he did not care. He is not the man he pretends to be. He is a fraud." The media frenzy reached new heights after that. My parents' PR team tried to downplay the allegations, but it was too late. The public had made up their mind, and there was no coming back from this. But my parents were not the only ones feeling the pressure. I, too, was under scrutiny. Reporters camped outside my house, and strangers approached me in public, asking for interviews or offering unsolicited advice. It was exhausting, but I refused to let it break me. I had my children to think about, and I was determined to protect them from the chaos. One evening, as I was putting the twins to bed, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "We need to talk. It is urgent." I felt a knot form in my stomach as I called her back. "What is going on?" Sarah's voice was tense. "Your parents are trying to settle. They are offering to return the money from the trust fund, plus additional compensation, if you drop the case and sign a non-disclosure agreement." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you think I should do?" Sarah hesitated. "Legally, it is a strong offer. It would give you financial security and closure. But it would also mean letting them off the hook. No public accountability, no admission of guilt. It is up to you, Emily. You have to decide what is more important, justice or peace." I hung up the phone, my mind racing. On one hand, the offer was tempting. It would give me the financial freedom I had always wanted, and it would allow me to move on with my life. But on the other hand, it felt like a betrayal, not just of myself, but of everyone who had been hurt by my parents. If I accepted the settlement, I would be letting them win, and I was not sure I could live with that. I spent the next few days agonizing over the decision. I talked to Mark, who was still overseas, but had been my rock throughout this entire ordeal. I talked to Sarah, who gave me unbiased advice, and I talked to myself, trying to figure out what I truly wanted. In the end, I made my decision. I called Sarah and told her to reject the settlement. "I am not backing down," I said, my voice firm. "They need to face the consequences of what they have done, and I need to know I did everything I could to hold them accountable." Sarah did not argue. "I will let them know, but be prepared, Emily. They are not going to take this well." She was right. The next day, my parents showed up at my house again. This time, they were not calm or pleading. They were furious. "How dare you!" my father shouted, his face red with rage. "After everything we have offered you, you still want to destroy us? You are ruining our lives," my mother added, her voice trembling with anger. "Is this what you want? To see us suffer?" I stood my ground, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. "You ruined your own lives. I am just making sure you face the consequences." My father took a step forward, his eyes blazing. "You will regret this, Emily. Mark my words." I did not flinch. "I already regret trusting you, but I will not regret standing up for myself and my family." They left that day, but I knew this was not the end. They were not going to give up without a fight, and neither was I. Over the next few weeks, the legal battle intensified. My parents pulled out all the stops, using every resource at their disposal to discredit me and undermine our case. But I refused to back down. I had the truth on my side, and I was determined to see this through to the end. Finally, after months of hearings and negotiations, the case went to trial. It was a grueling process, but I held my head high. I testified, sharing my story with the court and the world. And when the verdict came in, I felt a sense of vindication I had never known before. The judge ruled in my favor, ordering my parents to return the stolen funds and pay additional damages. He also issued a public statement condemning their actions and calling for accountability. As I walked out of the courtroom that day, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, exhaustion, and a strange sense of closure. It was over. Finally, it was over. But as I looked at my children, waiting for me outside the courthouse, I knew this was not just the end of a legal battle. It was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I was in control, where I was no longer the victim, but the victor. The verdict was a victory, but it was not the end. My parents, once untouchable in their world of wealth and privilege, were now facing the consequences of their actions. The court had ordered them to return the stolen funds from the trust, pay substantial damages, and issue a public apology. But the real punishment was the fallout from the trial. Their reputation was in ruins, their social standing obliterated. The people who had once admired them now turned their backs, and the life they had built on lies and manipulation was crumbling around them. I watched from a distance as they struggled to cope with their new reality. My father's law firm severed all ties with him, and my mother was asked to resign from every charity board she had ever been a part of. Their friends, their colleagues, even their neighbors distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. For the first time in their lives, they were alone, and for the first time in mine, I felt free. But freedom came with its own challenges. The media attention did not die down overnight, and I found myself constantly on guard, protecting my children from the chaos. Mark, who had returned from deployment shortly after the trial, was my rock through it all. He stood by me, unwavering in his support, and together we began to rebuild our lives. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the twins play in the yard, Mark turned to me with a serious expression. "Emily, I have been thinking. We have been through so much, and we have come out stronger. But I do not want to live in the shadow of what happened. I want us to start fresh, somewhere new." I looked at him, surprised, but not entirely opposed to the idea. "What are you saying?" He took my hand, his eyes filled with determination. "I'm saying we should move. Start over in a place where no one knows our story, where we can just be a family without all the noise." The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. Moving meant leaving behind everything familiar, but it also meant leaving behind the pain and the memories. It meant a chance to truly start over. After weeks of discussion and planning, we made the decision. We sold our house, packed up our lives, and moved to a small town on the coast. It was a quiet, peaceful place, far removed from the chaos of the city. The twins loved it immediately, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of calm. But just as we were settling into our new life, something unexpected happened. I received a letter in the mail, addressed to me in my mother's handwriting. My heart raced as I opened it, unsure of what to expect. The letter was short, but the words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Emily, I know you have no reason to believe me, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. I have lost everything, my reputation, my friends, even your father. He left me, Emily. He could not handle the fallout from the trial, and he walked away. I am alone now, and I have had a lot of time to think. I realize now how wrong I was, how much I hurt you. I do not expect you to forgive me, but I hope one day you can understand that I was not always like this. I was not always this person. I love you, Emily. I always have. And I am sorry. Mom." I stared at the letter, my hands trembling. Part of me wanted to crumple it up and throw it away, to forget it ever existed. But another part of me felt a pang of something I had not felt in a long time. Pity. Mark found me sitting on the porch, the letter in my hands. He sat down beside me, his presence calming. "What is it?" I handed him the letter, too overwhelmed to speak. He read it in silence, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he looked at me, his eyes filled with concern. "What are you going to do?" I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes. "I do not know. Part of me wants to forgive her, to believe she has changed, but the other part of me is still so angry. I do not know if I can ever trust her again." Mark squeezed my hand, his voice gentle. "You do not have to decide right now. Take your time. Whatever you choose, I will support you." I nodded, grateful for his understanding. But deep down, I knew I could not ignore the letter. It was a reminder that, despite everything, my mother was still my mother. And maybe, just maybe, she deserved a second chance. A few weeks later, I made the decision to visit her. I did not tell her I was coming. I did not want to give her the chance to prepare or manipulate the situation. I simply showed up at her door, my heart pounding in my chest. When she opened the door, she looked older, frailer than I remembered. Her eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "Emily," she finally said, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "I got your letter. I came to talk." She nodded, stepping aside to let me in. The house was quiet, almost eerily so. It was clear she was alone, just as she had said in her letter. We sat in the living room, the tension between us palpable. Finally, I broke the silence. "Why now? Why are you apologizing now?" She looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I have nothing left to lose. I have lost everything, Emily, and I realize now that it is my own fault. I was so focused on appearances, on maintaining this perfect image, that I lost sight of what really mattered. You, your father, our family." I felt a lump form in my throat, but I forced myself to stay composed. "You hurt me, Mom. You hurt all of us, and I do not know if I can ever forgive you for that." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know, and I do not expect you to, but I want you to know that I am sorry, truly sorry, and if there is any way I can make it right, I will." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw not the cold, controlling woman who had betrayed me, but a broken, lonely person who had lost her way. And in that moment, I realized something important. Forgiveness was not about forgetting or excusing what she had done. It was about letting go of the anger and the pain for my own sake. I do not know if we can ever have the relationship we used to have, I said, my voice steady, but I am willing to try. For me, for us. She looked at me, her eyes filled with hope and gratitude. Thank you, Emily. That is all I can ask for. As I left her house that day, I felt a sense of closure I had not known was possible. I had faced my greatest fear, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and I had come out stronger on the other side. I had taken control of my life, fought for justice, and found a way to move forward. And as I drove home to my family, to the life I had built with Mark and the twins, I realized something else. I was no longer defined by my parents' betrayal. I was defined by my strength, my resilience, and my ability to rise above the pain. I was not just a survivor, I was a victor, and nothing and no one could ever take that away from me.